The world faces interlinked challenges of climate change and food security. Smallholder farmers, particularly in low and middle-income countries, are among those most vulnerable to climate change. At the same time, agriculture is responsible for 1/4 to 1/3 of global emissions. Multiple innovations can help boost the resilience of farmers and food systems, reduce agricultural emissions, or both. I'm presenting on behalf of the Innovation Commission for Climate Change, Food Security, and Agriculture, which is formed by former heads of state, cabinet ministers, and leaders from civil society and international organizations. The Commission identifies innovations with rigorous evidence of impact and cost effectiveness and develops concrete recommendations to transition them to scale. One key activity is identifying innovations that are ready to transition to scale. We adopted fairly strict inclusion criteria for these innovations. In particular, we focused on innovations with rigorous evidence of causal impact and cost effectiveness, typically from randomized controlled trials. We sought this evidence not only for the innovation itself, for example, flood-resistant seeds, but also for policies to increase the adoption of the innovation. And we looked for innovations with a plausible pathway to scale. Within adaptation innovations, we focused on those serving people whose livelihoods are most vulnerable to climate change, smallholder farmers and landless laborers in low and middle-income countries. For mitigation innovations, we focused on those that would deliver substantial co-benefits to low and middle-income countries. Many of these have substantial benefits beyond the country that implements them, making them regional or global public goods. This means that individual governments' incentives to invest in them is not commensurate with social needs. International institutions can play a key role in supporting countries to adapt these innovations for scaling in their context, to refine and test them, for example, using A/B tests, and to scale them to boost resilience, food security, and agricultural productivity in the context of climate change. Knowledge generated by these efforts is itself a global public good. I'll start by discussing a few examples of adaptation innovations which already have strong evidence of impact and cost effectiveness, where more support could make a real difference in scaling. One such innovation is procuring and disseminating high-quality weather forecasts for farmers. Weather uncertainty increases risks to farmers. Not only do adverse weather events harm production directly, their risk decreases farmers' incentives to invest in productive assets, constraining productivity even in years with normal weather. Climate change is increasing the variability in rainfall, temperature, and the timing of seasons, creating more uncertainty for farmers. Advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence have enabled vastly more accurate and timely weather forecasts. These can help farmers adapt to changing weather patterns. In many areas, for example, monsoon onset can now be predicted a month in advance. Procuring regional forecasts of the onset of the Asian monsoon and similar weather systems in Africa, covering 12 countries with roughly 300 million farming families, is estimated to cost $23 million over 5 years. For India, the cost would be around $5 million over 5 years. There's strong evidence that farmers adapt agricultural practices in response to accurate forecasts, and that this substantially increases investment in yields. Estimated gains for just one type of forecast in India alone are in the billions of dollars. We don't have estimates for all 12 countries and all types of forecasts, but it seems clear that the benefits would be more than 100 times the cost. However, most farmers in low and middle-income countries currently lack access to reliable, high-quality local forecasts. Improved weather forecasts could be disseminated to farmers using digital agricultural extension services, which is another innovation with rigorous evidence of impact and cost effectiveness. Timely, customized, digital agricultural extension services delivered directly to farmers' phones provide a low-cost way to help farmers become more resilient to the changes in weather, pests, and soil salinity and chemistry that accompany climate change. For example, East African farmers who received SMS messages were on average 22% more likely to adopt agricultural lime for acidic soils, and were also more likely to use appropriate fertilizer. Digital agriculture has some setup costs, designing messages, A/B testing to confirm they work, but then very low marginal cost. At around 1/10 of a cent per text message, it's very cheap to add more farmers once the system is set up. This means that it's efficient to deliver at very large scale. With a large enough program, the average cost approaches the marginal cost as the fixed costs are spread across more farmers. A back-of-the-envelope calculation suggests a 46-to-1 benefit-cost ratio for very large-scale programs. Typically, it makes sense for national governments to deliver the messages since they can reach very large scale. It's more difficult for private sector organizations to reach efficient scale with the subscription model. Farmers can share information, so may have limited incentives to pay for advice. Millions of farmers are already benefiting from digital agriculture programs launched by governments, often working with technical partners to use principles of human-centered design and A/B testing to make messages relevant, accessible, and useful for farmers. For example, human-centered design principles were used to redesign soil health cards in Gujarat, India, and develop complementary multimedia materials to better convey information to farmers. Similarly, in Ethiopia, identifying the obstacles farmers faced when using the hotline and conducting A/B tests to refine the service substantially increased the fraction of users who successfully obtained advice from an agriculture hotline. The provision of weather forecasts can be an entry point for digital agriculture. This infrastructure can be leveraged to offer more complex digital agriculture services over time, such as services that facilitate connections among farmers and connect extension workers and farmers, provide farmers with information on input suppliers, or link farmers with each other or with cooperatives or contract farming operations that can purchase their output. Innovations in social protection can support households to cope with weather events and move out of extreme poverty. For example, digital agricultural extension services could also be combined with other digital services, such as anticipatory cash transfers, which can help farmers prepare for extreme weather events. Weather-responsive anticipatory cash transfers leverage forecasting models, remote sensing, and mobile banking to deliver cash to households ahead of climate-related disasters, such as floods. Growing evidence suggests that providing cash transfers ahead of floods can boost food security and resilience more cost-effectively than ex-post assistance. In Bangladesh, the World Food Programme used data-driven forecasting to send cash transfers to households about to experience severe flooding. Households that received the transfer before a flood hit were 36% less likely to go a day without eating and more likely to evacuate household members and assets, like livestock. To take another example, graduation programs are a multifaceted innovation designed to help poor households move persistently out of extreme poverty. The graduation approach, designed by the Bangladeshi NGO BRAC, is designed to equip households with the skills and productive assets to increase earnings and start a virtuous cycle of savings and investment. BRAC developed the approach in Bangladesh, and it has since been implemented in several other countries. Graduation programs have persistent positive impacts on consumption, assets, and earnings, with persistent benefits more than 3 times their cost. BRAC's graduation program in Bangladesh increased earnings by 21% 4 years after the asset transfer. Among villages that had been hit by a sustained drought, the graduation program protected households from incurring a 30% reduction in their assets, such as livestock. I've had time to discuss only a handful of the innovations. The enormous costs and risks of climate change justify investing in many potential innovations and mechanisms to take innovations to scale. It's great to speak today to many partners committed to innovation at the intersection of climate change, food security, and agriculture. We look forward to working closely with all of you to further develop and scale innovations and reach hundreds of millions of farmers.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Good afternoon, everybody. A pleasure really to be with you today here and to give you a presentation on research and innovation to maximize gains and add a little bit more innovation than the one that were mentioned by Michael. So first, if we look at what are we expecting from food system looking at 2050. So we would like our agri-food system to be greatly improved nutrition, diet, and health. We're looking that they're gonna improve the living standards and the resilience of livelihood to shocks. We're looking that they have to be zero greenhouse gas emission or maybe even negative emission ratio. We're looking that the biodiversity loss will be halted and the general environment condition going to be improving. And we are looking that those agri-food systems going to be the engine of inclusion. All of this in addition to providing us food every day, which we tend sometimes to really underplay. So agri-food systems are mostly to produce food, and we can't live without food, whereas in all honesty, we could live without energy. And we could live without phones, but food is a must. So in addition to the food, which is the priority number one, we want all of this from our agri-food system. And all of this in an increasing, volatile, and warmer temperature. So let's look what we have right now. So today, our agri-food system, and it was mentioned by Michael and by colleague this morning, Schengen and other colleagues, is responsible for 37% of greenhouse gas emission. It does threaten 86% of species currently at risk of extinction. It does drive deforestation. It does account for 70% of the water, the fresh water, used globally. And unfortunately, we still have a third of it that is wasted and lost, both post-harvest loss and waste. But let's look at how did we fare in the last few years. And sincere thanks to Shannon for these slides. So if we look since 1990 to 2019, we did very well. We moved actually really the malnutrition, or particularly the poverty line, from about 38% to only 8% now. In terms of numbers, we have moved really poverty from about 2 billion people to about, right now we're saying about 821. So in the grand scheme of things, we have done very, very well from the 90s to 2019. And we could do that by calculating what we call the growth, the total factor productivity, which is the growth in output minus the input. And what we can see here, there is a different trends between different categories of countries. So in the low-income countries, what we see is that 2/3 of the production growth is driven by growth in input. So we're putting more labor, we're putting more input, we're putting more fertilizer, seeds, capital, and 1/3 only comes from technology development. If we look at the low-middle income country, it's the other way around. So we have 2/3 that comes from technology, and we have 1/3 that come from increasing input. You go to the upper middle income countries, and there what you have that all the increase come from technology growth or progress, and you have very little addition of the input. You go to high income country, and it's another story whereby not only you increase productivity, but also you reduce input. And all of them come mostly from research and development. You look at it and you see in gray, it's the CGR R&D, research and development. You look at the orange, it's public research and development. So what we could see here is that really a huge portion of it comes from investing in research and development, and we are very glad as CGR that we were particularly very influential in increasing productivity in low and middle income countries. So what I want to say here is that this is how it used to be in the past. But right now, if we want to project to 2050, what's happening is that we don't need as much production increase. Our problems today are different. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. Quality of what we are producing and quality of how we are producing it. So the difference between before and now is that the first difference that we need a smaller incremental food production task for the next 30 years. And the other difference that is most regionally concentrated. So if you look at the regional distribution here, what we had in Sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia, and the MENA, we had about 45% increase in 1999 to 2020, but we want it to be about 80% going forward in the next 30 years. So the problem is different, and we have to recognize it, because if we don't recognize that the problem is different, we're gonna keep doing the same. And today, what we need to focus on and what we need to invest in is different. And that's where CGR comes in play. So CGR had a lot of input, as we showed in the graph, for the last 99 to 2020, but we'll have even more for the next 30 years. And that's where we are focusing on mostly 5 impact areas: nutrition, health, and food security. So we have to produce much more nutritious and much more fit for purpose in terms of communities and the region. Poverty reduction and livelihood and jobs definitely will continue to be very important going forward. Gender equality, youth, and social inclusion. We need to bring much more these subjects on the front when we are talking about increasing agricultural productivity. And of course, all of this has to be part and parcel of our adaptation, climate change adaptation agenda, and it has to respect environment, and it has also to make sure that it stops degrading the biodiversity. So I want to take you 4 examples, and believe me, I wish I had more time to give more, but just few examples to showcase to you what are really the breakthroughs and some of the innovation that would make producing food in the future different. The first example is from Timor-Leste, and it's actually a digital tools, like also what Michael mentioned on many digital tools that could make a difference. So the digital tools called Pescas will help us really monitor the fish and the fisheries and also the fish stock. And what will it bring to the farmers? It will bring to the farmers and to the communities a better way to know when to fish, when not to fish, what to fish, and what market to access as well. And this is already in place in Timor-Leste that allowed the government to really monitor better and to manage better their fish stock, but it's also in scaling up or in utilization in Tanzania and Kenya. The second example is from SIP on potato, and this is a zero-tillage rice straw mulch potatoes. So right now, instead of really disturbing the earth and not only getting to zero tillage, it's also you don't take actually the mulch of the rice. You leave it on the ground, and basically you are doing a kind of a soilless agriculture system on the field. The soil is there, but the soil is below the mulch. And what does it do? It does allow you to reduce evapotranspiration from your soil, but also it increases the humidity in the soil, and it increases productivity. So this methodology is now, and really in many countries, it's part and parcel of many countries in the region, including India, including Cambodia, and other countries. The third example, it's the importance of data again for reducing the agricultural risk, the intrinsic risk that exists in the agriculture. And this is different project. One of them is with the Asian Development Bank, looking at satellite imagery and allowing us really to help insurance companies to have the right data that will allow the farmers to maintain their income from the agriculture sector. So there are examples from Philippines, but there is also examples in India, and there are a number of programs that really use big data and satellite images to provide us that information. And my last example, and just to give some few examples, it's going back to what Dr. Fat said about irrigation and how important is irrigation. So this example is from Nepal, whereby the CGR centers, including EMI, brought a way to use the underground water in Nepal to allow farmers to have many crops per year and to have crops all year around. My last point, other than bringing different innovation, is that if we look at it at the bottom line, what do we need to do going forward, and how could we maximize really the climate food nexus and environment nexus? So the most important, if I want to say one word, it's really to build resilience and diversification. And this is a paper with Hateful and colleagues on diversification of the enhanced food system. So as we are imagining our agri-food system going to 2050, what we want them to have, it's to be financially equitable, and that we can call it economic resilience. We want them to be supportive to whole community, that's social resilience, and we need them to minimize harmful input on the environment, and that's ecological resilience. And the only way to do it is to build in diversification along the whole value chain or the whole agri-food system. So we need diversification at the production level, at the market level, at the household level, and across. And unless we build that diversification from using much more species that we are using right now in crop, fish, and animals, in diversifying the market, not make only the global market the most important, but maybe think regional, sub-regional markets, but as well household income and the other component of the agri-food system. With that, I really want to leave you with this slide on with science we can. So given that the challenges are different, the only way going forward for us really to increase that productivity in those regions where we need it the most, particularly in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and in the MENA, is to do it based on science and innovation, and that's the investment plan of the CGR for the next few years. Thank you very much.